Hello and welcome back to Church at Home with Rachel for the 31st of August. My name is Rachel Parker and I am the Anglican priest for the churches of St. Thomas in Wainwright and St. Mary's in Edgerton, both in southeastern Alberta, Canada. My pronouns are she, her, and hers, and it is my pleasure to be back with you after 2 weeks on hiatus. A little bit of time off, and came back early from holidays for a funeral, but glad to be back with all of you here at Church at Home. I look a little different today. I have my new specs on. I have a new pair of reading glasses and a new pair of regular glasses, which I picked up this over my holidays, and so now I can actually see you. So it's a good thing. Sight is something that we might all take for granted, but when you realize how much you haven't been able to see before, when you get new glasses, it really opens up the world to what you've been missing. And I think the same thing can be said about learning, that when we recognize those things that we have not understood, or recognize the vast amount of knowledge that we don't know yet, we open up our whole worlds to this idea that maybe there is more out there than we had assumed. I've talked about this book before, Christianity for the Rest of Us, How the Neighborhood Church is Transforming the Faith by Diana Butler Bass. And I've been reading this for a while. I only read it for about 10 minutes every day and sort of think on it, so I haven't gotten very far in. But I'd like to share with you something I read a couple of days ago. She says here, once, not so long ago, liberal was a good word meaning generosity and openness. It implied a whole host of positive things: reform, freedom, toleration, thoughtful inquiry, and lack of prejudice and absence of bigotry. In its most classical sense, liberal meant opposition to dogmatism, authoritarianism, inquisition, religious bigotry, and theological intolerance. Historically, religious liberality, theological generosity sparked much of the energy, passion, and intellectual liveliness of American Protestantism. And she goes on to say that people are, we're talking about the decline of churches, especially liberal churches in North America. And that she says here that there's an assumption by the more evangelical or fundamentalist churches and society in general that assume that liberal churches are in decline because they are liberal. Conservative churches grow because they are conservative. People hunger for order and authority in a confusing world. People need answers. The assumption is that people need answers. And I think she's right. She goes on to challenge that assumption that people need answers. But more and more, it's not so much the answers that people are seeking for, but the opportunity to ask the question, the atmosphere in which they know they can ask the question or questions without fear of being persecuted, without fear of being lambasted, without fear of those people who know everything and are certain in what they believe, coming down on them for having doubts. Not knowing something and having curiosity, having doubts, does not mean you're faithless. It does not mean you're not being faithful. As a matter of fact, I would argue, because I'm a liberal Christian, that if you have questions, that actually helps you to grow your faith. It allows you to think about what God has done and what God is doing in your life. It allows you to be frustrated and angry when you wonder why something bad has happened, or things are happening in the world that we can't just fix, things that we believe as Christians we're not supposed to watch happen, and yet they are, and often they're spurred on by others who call themselves Christians. So this idea that people need answers, and that is why the more conservative church seems to be thriving, because they provide answers, isn't necessarily a truth. It is an assumption. And you know what they say about the word assume, it makes an ass of you and me. So thinking about that sense of liberality, that sense of being liberal in all of those things, that theological generosity that sparks energy and passion and intellectual liveliness, that once did that in the American Protestant scene, in the North American Protestant scene, I would suggest, that needs to be alive and well. And I think it really is. I think that the conservative voices are out shouting us. She also goes on to say these mainline pilgrims, she's talking about some churches in mainline Protestant churches, that their churches are growing and they are speaking to the needs of people, and they are opening up a forum in which people can ask questions and share their ideas and their answers if they have some. But more importantly, they have opportunity to explore. And she says these mainline pilgrims linked intellectual curiosity with humility. For the people I met, thinking theologically did not mean arriving at certain conclusions. Did not mean arriving at certain conclusions. She goes on to say, as soon as certainty replaces humility, it leaves little room for the intellect to transport the faithful to awe. It does not much matter if certainty is that of the left or of the right. When we become certain of something, we stop asking questions. If I am certain that the sky outside my window is blue, why would I ask a question about that? If I say it's blue, then I have no need to determine what color of blue is it, or what is it about the science of our atmosphere that makes the sky appear to be blue? Is the sky indeed blue? Because if I say with absolute certainty that the sky is blue, without the humility of recognizing who I am in relation to such a grand thing as the sky, then I have no desire, I have no need to ask questions. But in my humility, when I recognize that I am just a small little wonder, amid a world full of wonders, and that sky out there beyond my window is this what appears to be blue, it makes me start to ask the questions like, why is it then that if you're flying in a plane through that blue sky, the air in front of you is not blue? What you're seeing is not a wall of blue. What is it about the microscopic parts, the atoms and the molecules and the quarks and quarks, or what they're called, and the protons and electrons about the air makes them appear to be blue? And how does the sun translate into that, or the precipitation, the water molecules in the sky? All of these things, if I am absolutely certain that the sky is blue, bang, then there's nothing for me to question. But if I am willing to humble myself and say, wait a minute, okay, it appears that the sky is blue, but why? That opens up a whole world of possibility. It doesn't mean that I don't believe the sky is blue. I still believe that. I still have faith that the sky is blue. But at the same time, I have a sense of wonder about what it is that makes the sky blue. And I think that's the thing about being a liberal Christian, is that I know that I believe that there are answers to my questions. I believe that God exists. I believe that Jesus Christ lived on this earth and walked this earth and died for my sins and was resurrected. And through his sacrifice, I have been given salvation. I believe all of that. But I also question it. I also wonder, how is it possible? And sometimes I have to recognize with humility that I don't know how it's all possible. And yet I believe. And yet I still question. And if I had the opportunity to ask somebody who could say to me, this is what the resurrection looked like scientifically, this is what physically happened to Jesus' body and his ascension and all of these things, okay, awesome. Show that to me. Share it with me. It will not diminish my belief. It will not diminish my faith. It might enhance it, because now I understand more of it. Because now I understand the science of it, that science that God created in the first place. For me, like being a liberal Christian, holding on to a liberal theology or a liberal Christology, I do believe that God created science, and that science, understanding it, only opens up the possibility that I can understand more of God. And as vast as the universe is, as vast as many galaxies as there are, every time we find in science that we get to the edge of something, we discover it's not the edge at all. It's an opening to something else. that it just gets vaster and vaster and vaster. There's so much more out there that we can only imagine, yet so it is with God. So it is with my sense of who I am as a child of God. This idea of liberal versus conservative, fundamentalist versus, Protestant or mainline, or any of the other things that we talk about when it comes to church and religion, Christian religion in particular. These are all just labels we put on to help us understand the questions that we have. There's nothing wrong with asking questions, and there's nothing wrong with me as a priest being able to say in all humility, I don't know the answer. Maybe that's what's wrong with the church today, is there are so many people who are striving to state this is the actual truth, this is the answer, the black and white, no questions asked, no gray, no rainbow, this is the answer. Because people are so fearful of what the answers might be, they determine ahead of time what the results of their questions will be. But God doesn't work that way. The world doesn't work that way. We need to be open to the possibilities that come with having a mind willing to question, having a mind willing to deal with the fact that the answer might be, I don't know. There's nothing wrong with being liberal. There isn't. Especially when we consider what liberal used to mean. Generosity and openness, reform, freedom, toleration, thoughtful inquiry, lack of prejudice and absence of bigotry, opposition to dogmatism, authoritarianism, inquisition, religious bigotry, and theological intolerance. Historically, religious liberality, theological generosity, sparked much of the energy, passion, and intellectual liveliness of our world. Let's work toward that. Let's lay aside our desire and our need to have the answer to everything, and open our minds that we might listen for the new questions, those questions that might answer our old questions, but open us to new things and new ideas. God is completely transforming our lives and our worlds all the time, opening us up to more and more new things. Let's be open. Let's ask questions. Let's be frustrated, but okay with the fact that sometimes there are no answers. Or the answer might be, we don't know yet, but we're working on it. Let's go liberal. Let's be completely who God called us to be. I do believe God has called all of us to be liberal, open, searching, seeking in our worlds, in our theologies, in our sense of who we are as people, in the way that we deal with our family and friends, our co-workers, that we might be open to hearing a new word. Thanks for joining me. I'll see you again tomorrow for Church at Home with Rachel. Have a blessed day.